Welcome to the Commercial Awareness Compass. This is your weekly guide to developing your commercial awareness in a way that goes beyond just the news. Each week we focus on one major news story, breaking it down to help you build your understanding at 3 levels: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So whether you're new to commercial awareness already or have some understanding, the goal is for you to really move up a level each week. So we're going to break down today's story in a way that's easy for you to follow. I'm Tori, I'm a future trainee solicitor, and I'm joined by Henry, a corporate lawyer and content creator. Today's session, we are going to focus on Forever 21's recent bankruptcy. We're going to go through each level: beginner, intermediate, and advanced. So keep an eye out for how each level builds on the next. So starting off at the beginner level, Henry, could you set the scene, please, and give us an overview of the story that we are talking about?
Yeah, for sure, Tori. As you kind of mentioned, Forever 21 has filed for bankruptcy in the US. And for those that don't know, Forever 21 is a fast fashion retailer. The company has kind of said that there are various factors that have kind of contributed to this outcome, including intense online competition from other sort of e-commerce retailers like Shein and Temu, however you pronounce it, operational costs increasing, and also the still ongoing effects of COVID-19 has kind of exacerbated the company's kind of economic difficulties. And I think despite trying to do outreach to try and sort of get a buyer for the US stores, no kind of viable offers have kind of emerged. So as a result, the kind of liquidation sales are undergo. And though I think surplus 350 stores in the US will close, they have announced, however, that the international stores and Forever 21's online presence will continue under sort of its parent company. And we will kind of see how things get on with that.
Thanks. I was just making notes of that because I think, yes, it's interesting. So it's closing in the US, but then the international stores will continue to run and the online store will continue to run.
Yeah, for now. And we'll kind of see further down the line whether or not that's enough, or the competitors like Shein, like Temu, and various other emerging kind of competitors in this kind of online e-commerce fashion retail market kind of also want to kind of throw themselves into the ring and kind of put more pressure on the Forever 21 brand.
Okay, so I think that e-commerce thing, that's something we can talk about at this beginner level, because I think that's kind of a general factor here. So do you want to say a bit more about that? And also the element of, I guess, competition and how it seems that maybe it's difficult to compete with online retailers?
Yeah, 100%. I think we've all been there. Sometimes you just see something online, it's super easy, it's super cheap, you get it, it's at your house the next day. So why wouldn't you do that? So I think Forever 21's kind of bankruptcy that we're seeing go through the motions at the moment kind of reinforces and highlights how kind of online competition is effectively reshaping the kind of the retail landscape. And I think that started or was accelerated by COVID-19, where we couldn't all kind of leave our houses and go to the stores to look at things, which then meant online retailers like the Sheins, like the Temus, can offer kind of faster delivery, faster processing, and just cheaper costs. So that's just kind of like a no-brainer for us as the end consumer. And I think it reinforces that law firms who are advising clients within the retail sector, whatever that may be, if that's fashion, if that's electronics, tech, they need to be rethinking and considering their business plans in the kind of the rise of and the growing significance of e-commerce platforms, and just kind of understanding that space and thinking, can we kind of shift our kind of proposal, our offering, to kind of take into consideration these factors. And ultimately shifting everything online reduces operational costs, and it makes it sort of slightly easier for those platforms.
Thanks. I think you had a really helpful point there about how when you think about online retailers, we can all imagine ourselves that it is a bit more convenient to order something online than to go into a store. And I'm really glad that you pointed that out, because I think at this beginner level, something that is important for viewers to keep in mind is that your insights as a consumer are relevant. So you can think about, as a consumer, what are the choices that you would make? Because then that is something that the business is being mindful of.
100%. And that's, again, you're looking at the lens of a business more like commercially then, because you think, if I make this decision as the end consumer, what's the business thinking about in terms of how can we shift this? And that's, again, the solutions that you would be providing to clients. And equally, we've touched on COVID-19 quite a bit. And I think we are still, for some businesses, seeing the fallout of this. And if you are like a retail business, for example, where you are manufacturing, shipping, delivering, or if you're a retail store that can't open because it's not a priority store, in terms of it's not a supermarket or a pharmacy or something, you can't operate. What do you then put in your contracts to kind of deal with this downfall? Is this a force majeure event? And when I was working through the pandemic, I worked with various clients, organizations that didn't have force majeure provisions. For those that don't know, force majeure is effectively a provision in your contract that says if something like an act of God were to happen, act of God being something like COVID-19, like an earthquake, like a power outage that affects the country, and you cannot perform your obligations under the contract, there's generally some kind of leeway because it's kind of out of your control. But a lot of contracts didn't have COVID-19 provisions, so they couldn't use that, and they still had to perform, or they were still contractually obliged to do certain things, even though they couldn't, which could impact in retail your supply chain or manufacturing, and the business is kind of throwing money, losing money as a result. So again, that's something we need to be advising clients within our sectors to keep in mind.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. And again, I mean, I think the COVID-19 point specifically related to how contracts are drafted and whether they have a force majeure clause that would capture that is also really helpful to any of our viewers at this beginner level, because of course that applies to the situation that we're talking about today with Forever 21, but it, I mean, can apply to so many other instances. So I think it is a really good basis to be building your commercial awareness from, to think about, how that could have affected other businesses.
Yeah, and I think if you also consider everything else, COVID-19 aside, that's kind of going on in the sort of political landscape right now, we've got kind of ongoing wars, like literal wars. We've got trade wars going on and stuff as well with various sort of countries. Those, again, are sort of things that could impact your, if we focus on the retail sector in terms of where are your clothes made, what's your supply chain, how do all of these things then impact the ongoing sort of the functionality and running of your business and the costs that are associated with that? What are your contracts saying around when these sorts of things happen?
Mm-hmm. So I think we're probably ready to move into the intermediate level. So now we have this understanding of what's going on here. So Forever 21 has filed for bankruptcy. There's this relevance of competition with online retailers and COVID-19. So then at this intermediate level, let's think about how law firms would assist. Do you want to say a bit more about that?
Yeah, so as we mentioned kind of in the intro, that despite outreach, Forever 21 hasn't been successful in being able to find a buyer for these retail stores. So that's why they're being closed. But something that probably law firms were doing with, let's say their client is a fund, it's a larger retailer or whatever, a competitor retailer who thought, oh, actually, this might be useful for our client to acquire. That's something law firms will be doing. They'll be advising clients to say, you're in the retail sector. Forever 21 is kind of looking for somebody to acquire certain parts of its business. So kind of giving that advice, giving that, how would we structure this? Are there certain parts of the business and assets that our client may want to purchase to help its business, or it kind of gives it that competitive edge? So that's another sort of way that law firms will be helping, even if you're not acting for Forever 21. Forever 21's law firm, I don't know off the top of my head who was representing them, but their restructuring and insolvency team will be sort of advising them on what's the best way, what are our debts looking like, what do we owe, how can we keep, say, the online business running, how can we keep the international business running, what's financially liable. If we sell off parts of the business, can we get some money to then pay off our sort of secured creditors, our unsecured creditors, which we'll come on to in the advanced stage, because I think that's probably best suited for that discussion. But then I also think it's really important to keep in mind the point around, we touched on this at the beginning as well, that we're going to be closing the US stores, but we are going to still be operating online and internationally. So again, how does kind of the various jurisdictions, different kind of bankruptcy laws, how does this affect operation in the various jurisdictions? So law firms kind of need to keep in mind implications of international trade policies. What does this mean? How is this going to impact our sort of client, and how is this going to impact more broadly the retail sector? Because as we may all sort of be aware of, a lot of these clothes that are sold by the Sheins and the Temus, these sort of fast fashion outlets that are online focused, they're not made in the US. They're made in sort of other countries where sort of manufacturing costs are a lot cheaper. So that is, again, something that organizations will need to keep in mind.
Yeah, it sounds like there is a wide array of work that lawyers could be getting involved in. I just wanted to ask a bit more about, because you mentioned considering, different mergers, opportunities. This is maybe way too broad of a question, but I think maybe you'll be able to narrow it down. But basically, what does it mean for law firms to be giving strategic advice on an M&A? How would a law firm be assisting in this instance on considering potential mergers?
Yeah, I think it's a conversation that law firms will be having with their clients in this space, in this sector. And I think it's very much sort of commercial, is very strategic. What assets does that organization have that perhaps would benefit our client? Is there a specific piece of IP, a specific bit of tech, maybe like a key supplier contract that perhaps would be beneficial for us to have? For example, the retail stores are closing down. There's a retail store in a prime location, or we want 10 of those locations. Can we buy them? Will it benefit us to buy the Forever 21 brand? Because again, brand and brand awareness and sort of the brand relationship that end consumers have, there could be a lot of value within that brand itself. So is it worth us buying that brand? I think not the same, but kind of the same here in the UK. What was once a household name in terms of department stores, Debenhams, closed down for a whole host of reasons. Again, sort of online competition, running costs, supplier costs were too much. But I think I read recently, last week or the weekend before, that it's reopening, but as an online only sort of operation. And again, that just shows there's goodwill, there's value in the Debenhams brand here in the UK. It's a household name for somebody to want to invest into that and to buy it. So that would have been a strategic decision in terms of, we're not going to run a huge bricks and mortar department store because they cost a lot. Not only do you need all the leases, the rent, you need the employees, the staff in these stores, and everything else that comes with that, the deliveries, the shipment. Let's just go online, so then it goes direct to consumer, which cuts out a lot of that cost. But then on the flip side, you have the whole narrative around the high streets here or in the US, the shopping malls that aren't being filled up, that you're not getting the foot traffic. And then there's the implications for those clients who own these sort of shopping malls. I think Westfield, for example, one of the biggest sort of shopping mall names, I think probably even globally, trying to fill somewhere like that with all these different sorts of retailers, and keeping in mind the online competition is something that a lot of those within the retail sector will be having these conversations around.
Mm-hmm. Thank you so much. I mean, I think that is really helpful for our viewers to think about all the different factors that law firms would consider. And you mentioned as well, there's this element of where a client is operating internationally, that there's many different things to consider with this different jurisdictions' laws being relevant. How would that look in a law firm? Would that be teams in different law firms, like, or different countries working together, or are lawyers expected to be understanding different jurisdictions or doing that research themselves?
A lot of sort of the international firms that the audience watching may be applying to will likely have offices and relevant experts in the jurisdictions that perhaps the client's operating out of. So I'm qualified here in England and Wales. I wouldn't give advice on US if it's a matter involving the US, because I'm not qualified to do so. Whilst I can give a commercial view, it's better in the client's interest to have an expert in the office in the jurisdiction that they're based in to kind of review it. They're qualified in that area. They know what they're doing. It's better for everybody for that to happen. And I think for sort of regulatory reasons as well, we shouldn't be advising on the laws of a different jurisdiction that we're not qualified in. So that's why the teams in the different offices in the various jurisdictions will work with sort of the international teams. And that's how, from sort of my own experiences, how sort of international issues are kind of processed and dealt with. If, for example, a law firm doesn't necessarily have an international presence or a presence within the jurisdiction that the client is perhaps operating, say they're only in Europe, in the UK, and not the US, but the client's based in the US on this particular matter, they may sort of seek external counsel from another firm that operates in the US. They may defer, they may have partner firms that they work with. So there is a way to kind of get the specialist advice that they need, and those teams will then work cohesively to ensure that the client's getting sort of legally sound and commercially sensible advice that they can use and then make the decision. Because ultimately, it's a decision for the business, for Forever 21, for example, to say, let's axe the stores, let's shut those down, but we'll keep the international ones for now. We'll keep the online sort of stores because Forever 21 is a very popular sort of recognized brand name in the US particularly. There's an element of nostalgia to it. There's so much attached to it that it makes sense, I guess, for them commercially to keep going in some capacity. So whilst the lawyers would have advised on that, ultimately it'd be a decision for them based on all of the advice that they got internationally and US based.
I think that is a really good reminder, because as much as when people are developing their commercial awareness, we need to understand how important it is for lawyers to have that commercial insight and expertise. Ultimately, yeah, the business will be making the decisions, and so the legal advice is key. Did you want to say anything else on this intermediate level, or should we move on to advanced?
I think, yeah, let's move on. But just on the point, sorry, it just came to my head that you were speaking around. It's the business that ultimately makes the decision. I think we can give suggestions and say this is probably the most sort of sound option, but these are the options available to you for the client to ultimately make. And that's just something that I try and keep in mind. I can present facts, I can present the law, the advice, but it's not for me to make that decision. And there will be commercial teams at these clients, at these businesses that ultimately sit down and say, let's do this. And then it's your role as a lawyer to then kind of put those wheels in motion to help make it happen.
Yeah, to facilitate and make it actually
work.
Okay, so on the advanced, there were a couple of things. So you mentioned earlier, I think we could come on to that, about this matter of secured versus unsecured creditors.
Yes. So when you're kind of winding up a business in any capacity, you have different levels of creditors. And what that means is who is going to get their money back. So say, for example, they have a lot of retail stores that are being closed down. There may be sort of loans secured against these properties. There may be, I think for those that don't know, the easiest way to explain what a secured creditor is I own this flat, I have a mortgage on this flat, that mortgage sits against this property. So for whatever reason, I can't afford to run this flat anymore, and it gets repossessed. Like, touch wood, that doesn't happen. But if it does, what the bank can do is when it's sold, the bank will sort of rank in a certain order, likely towards the top, and they will say, we want our money back first because we have this mortgage secured against it. And then if there were any other creditors that were kind of secured against this, they would rank X, Y, and Z. And then any unsecured creditors that I have liabilities towards would be paid last because they rank lower down the priority list. So that's where you have your secured creditors and your unsecured creditors. And if on the sort of the winding up, the selling of the business and aspects of the business, whatever's in the pot is in the pot, money-wise, and then that gets allocated to the various different creditors. So it will be the law firms, the restructuring and the insolvency teams to kind of look through what creditors, what liabilities does this distressed company have, how much money is in here, what can we do to pay them off, what kind of arrangement can we come to? Because if you are a creditor, if you're owed money, you want your money, of course, but if there isn't any money, what are we going to do around that? And that's where that team will kind of sit involved and kind of advise accordingly.
Thank you. It's a helpful overview. And I mean, any of our viewers who the SQE is in their future, this is something that we learn on the SQE as well. I wasn't expecting it to be as interesting as I think that it actually is. Yeah, like this, in the circumstance of bankruptcy or insolvency, and you're thinking about in the order in which creditors are paid, I think it actually is really interesting and very consequential. So it makes sense that that's something lawyers will be giving a lot of thought to.
100%. It's one of my, not regrets, but I kind of wish that I would have done a restructuring and insolvency seat on my training contract because of the implications. Ultimately, that could be the end of the road for so many businesses. For every kind of client that is a client of the firm, there is always a risk of kind of bankruptcy, and you have to kind of wind up, or you need to restructure, and that's that team's kind of basically role. So I think it's a very interesting space, as you mentioned, Tori.
Absolutely. So I think that was good to go over at this advanced level, but there are lots of other things that we can talk about as well. I think taking this big picture view, keeping in mind that ultimately at the advanced level, we're thinking about giving strategic, forward-thinking legal advice. So maybe we could talk about, because we mentioned at the beginner level that e-commerce platforms, competing with those is a factor here. So then how can law firms then be advising their clients in that strategic and forward-thinking way?
For sure. I would suggest that one of the best ways to kind of look into this is kind of focusing on, you've got X number of stores, maybe you want to kind of focus more on your online presence, kind of adjust your sort of your business plan, your sort of forecasting in terms of the increasing dominance of these e-commerce platforms, and just it's the trend, it's where kind of consumers are shopping. So we're seeing more and more businesses kind of, if you look at the sort of the dominance of Amazon, for example, and apps on our phones and being able to get things delivered the same day, that's what consumers are ultimately looking at. I know if I want something, I want it today, tomorrow at the latest. And if I can order it on an app rather than having to kind of leave my house, or if I'm on the train and I need something, or I need a new like fit for an event or something, that's what consumers are looking at. That's consumer behavior. And we're seeing more and more businesses kind of look like that. We're seeing businesses adjust their prices accordingly, and sort of sector experts, most firms have a retail and e-commerce sector, will be again kind of advising clients, giving them updates, looking at trends in the market, see what's happening. Sort of we're seeing manufacturing in a lot of like countries abroad because it's sort of cheaper, and they are strategies that law firms will be having with their clients to say, this is what we think is coming up, this is on the horizon, have you considered this?
Thanks so much for outlining that, because I do think it is really helpful to keep in mind that because commercial awareness is such an important skill for lawyers, that keeping an eye on those trends in the markets, even though they're not directly legal trends, is super important. Is there anything else at this advanced stage that you think lawyers would need to be alert to, any other factors to enable them to give this forward-thinking advice?
Yeah, definitely. We focused a lot on the business itself, sort of shutting down its retail stores. But you also have to keep in mind that individuals have gone to these stores, they've bought things. They may have bought it like the day before. They may have bought gift cards. They may want to return something because it doesn't fit. What consumer protections are there if you're not acting for like the actual company itself? You're acting for, like we spoke a few weeks back around mass actions. What are these individuals going to be able to do in terms of getting a refund? What are the consumer protections? Because we have a lot of consumer protection laws here in the UK, but what does that look like in the US? What are customers kind of being made aware of? What are their rights in this space? And again, that's kind of the flip side to the stores are closing. What's the impact? Who is that impacting? What's the risk here? What do we do to mitigate that risk?
Yeah, again, I think I can't emphasize enough the thinking of things from the consumer perspective is such a great way to strengthen your commercial awareness. And of course, consumer protection makes complete sense in this instance. As you say, there are people who have purchased items, gift cards, and what would they do if they need to return them? I actually don't have any other questions. Was there anything else that you wanted to add about this story or commercial awareness?
I think we've pretty much covered kind of all of the key areas that I think that this story highlights. But again, it's one of those, like a lot of these, they're not stories in isolation. The retail stores have closed down in the US for the time being, but over time, we're going to have to keep an eye on what's happening with the business as a whole. Maybe they're going to close down like international. Maybe they're going to close down kind of the online presence and just wind it up in its entirety. So it's one of those ones that we'll have to keep following to see what the ongoing implications are.
Absolutely. I think that is always a great tip, to keep following the story and then keep thinking about the different ways that it connects to commercial awareness. Because I think any story, I think if you sit with it long enough, you can always come up with more and more reasons why it could be relevant to businesses and to law firms.
100%. Can agree more.
So thank you so much, Henry, for your insights. I think we'll close the session then. So thank you to our viewers for joining today's, or our listeners for joining us today for Commercial Awareness Compass. Remember that commercial awareness is more than just staying on top of the news. This is really important. So when you're proving your commercial awareness, it's not just about regurgitating what you've heard in the news. It's really about reflecting in the way that we've been chatting about today, about why these events matter to clients, and then how you, as a future lawyer, can provide that strategic value. So join us next week to continue building your commercial awareness. And until then, prepare without the panic.